Welcome to our George Washington Monument birthday program today. I think I got words out of order, but oh well. Hey, if you're able to say hi in the chat and let us know where you're coming from and maybe your school and what grade you're in. We'd love to know who we're chatting with and get familiar with that chat box because we have a lot of questions and things to talk to you about today. So thank you for joining us. This is being recorded, just so you know. And we are really glad to have you with us today. So I am going to pass it to Edward for a welcome from the Trust for the National Mall, our hosts for the day.
Thank you, Ranger Jen. So as Jen mentioned, I'm Edward Kramanikov. I work at the Trust for the National Mall, and we partner with the Park Service to help bring the National Mall to life. And I want to welcome everyone from across the country who are joining us today and also watching at a later time. The theme today is President's Day, specifically around George Washington and the Washington Monument. While the holiday celebrates just a few people, it is also an opportunity really to celebrate people in your lives who has a presidential importance for you. Parents, friends, teachers, all have a role in your story. And your story has a place on the National Mall where you are always welcome. So today, as you listen to the wonderful presentation we have in store, think about who is important to you, and sometimes later, make sure to let them know. We're so glad to have you here with us. We hope to see you next time. And now I'll send it over to Ranger Bethany.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ranger Bethany, and I'm a park ranger here in Washington, D.C. on the National Mall, which definitely includes the Washington Monument, which if you look above Ranger Jen's head, you can actually see the Washington Monument there in her picture. And we're really excited this year. Last year, we had the opportunity to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Lincoln Memorial. So in May of last year, that building turned 100 years old. And this year, we're excited to not only celebrate George Washington's 291st birthday, but also the 175th anniversary of the placement of the cornerstone, which kicked off the construction of the Washington Monument. So it's kind of a big year for us. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen here. So again, our topic today is certainly the Washington Monument. And I'm going to start everyone off with a trivia question here. Does anyone know why George Washington has a monument? So why does George Washington have a monument? Is it because A, he was our first president, B, he was a general, or C, he was still alive when they decided to build something to commemorate him? So if you want to throw in the chat box there, A, B, or C, Ranger Jen will monitor that for us. So why does George Washington have a monument? And if you look at a lot of the other places that we have in the park, Abraham Lincoln has a memorial. Thomas Jefferson has a memorial. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has a memorial. So we have lots of memorials, but we only really have one monument. So why is that?
We have A straight across the board. Everybody thinks it's A.
Everyone thinks it's A. Okay, let's check it out. Let's see if the answer is in fact A. Oh, no, we got to try again. What do we think? Do we want to try another answer?
Now it looks like we're all B's.
All B's.
I might have seen a C sneak by there, but it was moving too fast.
Okay, let's check out B first. No, the answer was in fact C. So George Washington has a monument because when they decided to honor him, he was still alive. And if we check out the very first map of Washington, D.C., we can see some locations that they were planning on creating. Up here, you'll notice is the president's house. We call that the White House today. Over here is the Capitol building. And then right here, where we see this letter A, this was the location of the Washington Monument. And on the map, it actually said that they were going to build an equestrian figure of George Washington, a monument voted in 1783 by Congress. And George Washington was still alive at that point. And so that's why we have a Washington monument. And you can see just how important the monument was, where its placement very close and sort of forms an L shape here with both the White House as well as with the Capitol building. So this was a very important part of this planned city, this opportunity to honor George Washington. But it's going to take some time. In fact, it's nearly 100 years from the time they decide they're going to honor George Washington till the time that a group of private citizens come together that really fulfill that promise. And the Washington National Monument Society decides that they are not only going to help build the Washington Monument, but they're also going to fund the building. So they're going to be in charge of getting all of the money that's necessary to complete this big project. And they wanted to create a monument that would be unlike anything the world had ever seen. And so when they decide to build, this was the original design that they were looking at. They called it the Washington National Monument. And if we sort of compare this to the Washington Monument that we have today, we're going to notice that there are some differences. The very first difference was this obelisk, which is the shape of the monument here, was supposed to be 600 feet tall. On the top part of the monument, instead of a pyramid, we would have a mostly flat roof, and then they would place a star, so more up towards the top there. Then there would be this building, which they called a colonnade. It was supposed to be 100 feet tall, and then inside our colonnade would be about 30 statues of Revolutionary War heroes and signers of the Declaration of Independence. So think of people like Benjamin Franklin or Alexander Hamilton or Thomas Jefferson. They would probably all have statues here in the Washington Monument because they were individuals that knew and worked with George Washington. But in order to build this incredibly ornate monument, they need something. And what they need is money. And they wanted the Washington Monument to be a people's monument. So they didn't want the government to fund it, and they didn't want just one person to donate all the money in order to build this monument. And so what they decided to do was put a limit on how much money one person could contribute each year to help build the Washington Monument. So, I should go back. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. Of course, they needed a statue of George Washington somewhere on his monument. So on top of that building, we would see a statue of George Washington in a chariot, of all things, which is a little odd to sort of think of that, but he was, again, a military general. So I think it made sense to them. But back to our question. How much money could one person donate to the Washington Monument each year? Is it $1, $10, or $20? And keep in mind that we're talking about the 1800s at this point. So what do we think? 1, 10, or 20?
Seeing a 20, I'm seeing some 10s.
Okay.
20, 10, 20, yeah.
Mostly
Got some
10s
big
and 20s.
spenders here.
Yeah, I like it. You might be a little bit surprised here. So if we try our 10, I'm going to try again there. And if we try our 20, we have to try again there. It was actually $1. So the most any one person could give per year would be $1. And so by July 4th, 1848, the Washington National Monument Society had enough money in place to begin building the Washington Monument. And so after laying that cornerstone, for the next 6 years, the monument progressed pretty steadily until the fall of 1854, when they reached a height of 152 feet. And then they stopped. They stopped building the Washington Monument at that point. And not only did they stop building it, they stopped for over 20 years. So the monument sat like this for a very long time. So next question then becomes, why did they stop building the Washington Monument? Did they A, run out of money? B, did the Civil War make them stop? I'm sorry, A, was run out of stone, B, Civil War, or C, did they run out of money?
We've got an A, some Bs, a C, a B. Gosh, we're all over. C, B, lots of different answers.
Different answers. All right. Well, let's
Lots of Bs.
Lots of Bs. All right. Well, let's start with B first to see whether or not the Civil War impacted the building of the Washington monuments. It actually didn't. It would extend the length of time that they had to stop, but it wasn't the reason they stopped. So let's check out A. So it wasn't because they ran out of stone. The reason was they actually ran out of money. And if we kind of think about that $1 donation cap, that did play a role in it. What was happening is the society was hoping as they continue to build, more and more donations would continue to come in, but it was taking quite a long time. I mean, 6 years to build maybe a quarter of the monument. And because of that, donations started to slow down and people weren't giving money to the monument. And so they stopped working again for a period of about 20 years. And so over time, the city kind of grew up around it. During the Civil War, the president gave permission to not only allow Union troops to train on the grounds of the Washington Monument, but they also allowed cattle to sort of graze there and roam there to help feed the troops. So people around town began to refer to it as the Washington National Monument Cattle Yard, or even sometimes it was called the Beef Depot Monument. And it became a little bit of an embarrassment that the fact that the Washington Monument really sort of sat there for so long unfinished. And if we take a look at this picture here, this is from the 1870s. So in the 1870s, cities and towns all over the country are beginning to plan big birthday parties for the country because it's going to turn 100. So it was 100 years since the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And Washington, D.C. wanted to do the same, but they had a problem. They had this unfinished Washington Monument to sort of contend with, and they weren't really sure what they were gonna do with it. Now, if we take a look at this picture, it's kind of fun to look at it. Does anybody notice what's missing in this photograph other than the top of the Washington Monument? Does anybody know what should be behind the Washington Monument?
Someone offered up the White House. Oh, we got a few, the White House.
Okay.
Somebody's suggesting, a few people are suggesting the Lincoln Memorial.
Ooh, that's a really good guess. Yeah, so if we're standing right here at the Washington Monument and we were to look straight north, the White House would kind of be over here off to the side. But behind the Washington Monument today, if we visit it, we would see the Lincoln Memorial back there. And at this time, it was actually the Potomac River. So the Potomac River's banks were pretty wide. And shortly after this photograph was taken, they began this big project where they would push the river back some, and they would have all of this land. And of course, this is where they decide to build the Abraham Lincoln Memorial. But this is kind of an interesting photograph. But again, the city, before they can do that big river project, they have to figure out what to do about the Washington Monument. And really, they had three choices. The first choice is they could simply finish it. Maybe modify the design a little bit. They did realize that that original design may be a little too expensive. So maybe they should get rid of that colonnade building and just build the obelisk itself, which again was to be about 600 feet tall. Or they could stop at the height that they already were, about 152, 156 feet, and they could maybe fix the top. Here you see someone thought that maybe they could put a big statue of George Washington up there on the top, although I don't know what that would look like if we're sort of standing down there at the bottom looking up at this big statue of George up there. Or their other choice was they could tear down what they had already built and used the stone to build something new. And a lot of people suggested what was called a triumphal arch, which is what you sort of see here. And this was often built for military figures. And again, because George Washington was a general, and then this would be placed somewhere in the city, perhaps over one of our main roads. And so if you were in charge of making this decision, would you finish the Washington Monument? Would you stop where at 152 feet? Or would you start over? So if you were managers, which of these three do you think is the best choice?
Got some ones. Most are saying ones. Oh, we got a two.
Okay.
Say majority's going one.
Majority's going to finish it. Fantastic. Yeah, one of the concerns they had with completely starting over was, well, how long will that take? It took us so long to get to 152 feet. If we tore it down and we started over, could be another 20 years before that archway is even finished. And so, yeah, we know today the decision was to go ahead and finish the Washington Monument, making a few changes to the original design. And if we look very closely at the Washington Monument today, though, we can still see a little bit of that work stoppage there in the color change that we have here about 156 feet up. You can see where the color change takes place. And that was because the bottom part stood there for so long. And when they decided to finish the Washington Monument, they had to go to a different quarry to get the stone, and that changed the color on the monument just a little bit there. All right, December 6th, 1884. It was a cold, breezy day, but finally the Washington Monument was to be finished, and they placed a capstone on top of the Washington Monument, marking the completion. This capstone was pretty remarkable at the time, even though it was only about 9 inches tall. And it was made, at least at the time, of a very rare, very expensive material. Does anybody know what our capstone is made out of? It's still up there today. Is our capstone made of silver, aluminum, or lead?
I got a lead. Oh, majority's going lead.
Wisdom's going lead.
Oh,
Okay.
I got a B. I got a 1. Majority though 3 lead.
Majority lead. Interesting. All right. I think you might be surprised. And again, this material was so rare and so uncommon that at the time it was the largest piece of this metal that had ever been cast up until this time. And they actually placed it in a jewelry store called Tiffany's in New York, so that people could pass by and see this extraordinary capstone that would eventually make its way 555 feet up into the air. And that material was, oh, it's actually aluminum. I'm not sure why my answers changed here, but it's actually aluminum. The top of the capstone that we have at the top of the Washington Monument today is aluminum. Okay, so before we take our virtual trip up to the top of the Washington Monument, and we show you what it's like to look out the windows about 500 feet up into the air, I want to have one more challenge for us. I want to do a very quick race of who is the tallest. All right, so here we have our 5 contestants in lane 1, all the way from the state of California, from the Redwood National and State Forest. We have one of the tallest trees in the world, the redwood tree. In lane 2, right here in Washington, D.C., occupied by every president but the one we're talking about today, George Washington, the White House. In lane 3, George Washington's monument. In lane 4, a symbol of freedom and democracy from New York, the Statue of Liberty. And all the way in lane 5, we have the tallest brick lighthouse in the United States, all the way from the Outer Banks on the island of Hatteras in North Carolina. We have Cape Hatteras Light Station. So your job is to determine which of these 5 contestants is the tallest. The Redwood Tree, the White House, the Washington Monument, the Statue of Liberty, or Cape Hatteras Light Station.
Ooh, we have a lot of 4s.
Interesting.
Yeah, Liberty statue, 4. Lots of
Okay.
Liberty.
Okay.
Oh, there's a 3. 4, 4.
Lots of 4s.
Lots of 4s.
All right, let's check it out. Let's see who is the tallest. So here we go. Ready, set, go. Oh, there we go. Yes, of course, the Washington Monument is the tallest at 555 feet and 5 1/8 inch. There in lane 1, our Redwood Tree averages about 300 feet tall, although some of them are close to 400. The White House there in lane 2, from the ground to the toppest point, is only about 70 feet tall. The Statue of Liberty from the ground to the tip of the torch is 305 feet tall. And I always find it amazing that a redwood tree is nearly as tall as the Statue of Liberty. And then there in lane 5, we have the lighthouse, which is about 193 feet tall. Now, can anybody tell me what all 5 of these things have in common?
National parks, and they have rangers.
Yes, they are all in national parks, and they do have rangers there. Yeah, so if you've ever wondered, the White House is a national park called President's Park. So yep, all of these are found in national parks.
All in the US, they're all standing.
They all are standing, yes. Yep. At least one of them has been moved. The lighthouse has been moved back. All right, now that we have learned a little bit about the Washington Monument, I'm going to stop sharing this, and we are going to take a virtual trip inside. So give me 1 second to share. All right, here we go, the Washington Monument, and we're kind of excited. We think that in a few weeks, the park will look like this. This is our very famous cherry blossom trees, which were a gift from Japan. And because of all the warm weather we're having, we're pretty sure that they're gonna be in bloom in maybe 2 or 3 weeks from now. So if you come out at that time, this is the view that you will see. As we said, or maybe I mentioned, the Washington Monument was built between 1848 and 1884. It stands 555 feet and 5 1/8 inches tall. It is the tallest, or one of the tallest, freestanding stone structures in the world. This means it has no metal support system. It's simply stone upon stone compressed together. And there are about 36,000 blocks of granite and marble in the Washington Monument. Now, of course, everybody wants to go inside to take a trip up to the top. This is our little lobby waiting area. Because it's so small and because we have so many people going inside, we do board from the back, but that is a good thing because it's going to give you an opportunity to say hello to our first president, George Washington there. This is a copy of a statue made by an artist by the name of Houdon. And the story goes is that he wanted to make a life mask out of George Washington. He wanted to use plaster. So he asked George Washington to lay down on the couch while he poured hot plaster all over his face. And then he had to leave it there to let it dry. And to help George breathe, he placed 2 straws up his nose. Now, George Washington supposedly wrote a letter a little bit later in his life where he said that this was not a fun experience and it's something that he did not want to ever have to do again. But for us, because there's no photographs of George Washington, this gives us a really good idea of what he looked like. In fact, this is almost as good as a photograph because it shows the exact measurements, the height of George Washington. It also shows the fact that he wore size 13 boots. So we've got a really good representation of George Washington there in the Washington Monument. This is made of bronze. Now, after you've said hello to George, the elevator will arrive. Once you board, it takes about 70 seconds to reach the 500-foot observation area. This is a big change from the original elevator, which ran on steam that took nearly 12 minutes to reach this same level. So this is a much quicker elevator system that we've got today. And as you look out these windows here, the first you'll see is the east view. And if you take a look, what are some of the things you see? Down here at the end is the US Capitol building. This grassy strip in the center here is what we call the National Mall, which is part of our park. And then framing the National Mall, the buildings that you see here, these are some of the Smithsonian institutions. So the Natural History Museum, the American History Museum, Air and Space is down there. And this is the original castle that you see right here, which was actually finished even before the Washington Monument. So this would be your east view. Next, you would head over to our south view. Here, you can see the Thomas Jefferson Memorial, which sits along the tidal basin, this big body of water. And this is where all of those cherry blossoms bloom. And then if you look very closely right across the river there in Virginia, you could have seen the Pentagon. Here's our west view. Of course, our famous Lincoln Memorial down here at the end of the reflecting pool. Up here towards the front is the World War II Memorial. And if you look really closely over here on the left side, that is the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. And then of course, right across the river here again is the state of Virginia. And then last but certainly not least is our northern view. If you look straight up here, you can see the White House. This sort of circular piece of grass here is called the ellipse. You see the national Christmas tree. This is where it is on the ellipse. And then a lot of the city that you see up here past the White House. And on a very clear day, kind of like what we have today in Washington, D.C., and what's on Jen's screen there, you can see about 30 miles. So you get a really good view of Washington, D.C. and the surrounding areas. Now, once you're done looking at the view, there's obviously a lot of other things to see in the Washington Monument. In 2011, there was an earthquake, I think about 90 miles away over in Virginia, that actually shook the monument and damaged it a little bit. Now, didn't really mess with the structural stability of the monument, so it was still pretty strong and it wasn't going anywhere, but it did form a number of cracks. And so engineers really had to fix the monument using pins and stone patches. And if you ever go inside and you look up, you can still see some of those repairs today. You'll also notice that we have the airplane light, which you can kind of see up towards the top there. But here, if you look over to the side, you can see this metal plate, whoops, which is holding part of the monument together. After you've looked at some of the earthquake damage, you can go down the steps 10 feet to the exhibit space and check out some of the exhibits. So remember when we were talking about that capstone, that aluminum capstone that's at the top of the Washington Monument? This is a replica of that. So you can see it is just about 9 inches tall there, sits on the very top. One of the things they realized after they had finished the monument is that because it was one of the tallest structures in the city, that quite often it would be struck by lightning. And you can actually see some pictures of it being hit by lightning on the internet. And it's kind of an interesting thing to watch. And so what they decided to do was put lightning rods up above the capstone. And so that those lightning rods would take sort of the brunt of the force of the lightning. And if you look down, kind of down here below, you'll see where some of them have actually sort of melted over. So our lightning rods are an important part of the Washington Monument. And if we see lightning in the area, unfortunately, we do have to close down.
I was in there once when there was lightning.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, we have a question. Can we pause for a sec?
Yeah, absolutely.
One class wants to know what the inscription says on the capstone.
Actually, all four sides have inscriptions. One of the inscriptions is the date that it was placed. So December of, was it 1884, December 6th, 1884. It also has the names of the engineers and the architects that were there the day that the capstone was placed. There is a Latin phrase called Laus Deo, which is also written on the commemorative stone. And then there are names of the architect, the engineers, the president at the time that the Washington Monument was going to be built. And so those are the inscriptions that we have on each of the four sides of the capstone. Does that answer our question? Awesome. Okay.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So if we kind of take a look at this, it kind of gives you an idea of sort of what the pyramid, at least inside the pyramid, looks like. You can see it's mostly made of stone, but then we have this elevator shaft that we do have in the middle there. So this kind of gives you an insider's view of what the Washington Monument looked like. And then on the way down, there is a special treat for you. So we have 193 commemorative stones on the inside of the Washington Monument. And up until about the 1970s, you had the option of either taking the elevator up and down, or you could walk the 893 steps to the top of the Washington Monument. And if you walked up all those steps, you got to see all of these very unique commemorative stones. And remember, we said that the Washington National Monument Society needed money in order to build the Washington Monument. And so they tried all kinds of fundraising. And one of the things they did is they began to reach out to the states, and they asked them to contribute some money to help build the Washington Monument. And some of those states, instead of giving money, actually gave stones to honor George Washington. And we have a very unique grouping of these stones. So we do have them from each of the 50 states. There are many from different organizations that were popular at the time. We have stones from fire departments. We have stones from schools, some of them that were named after George Washington. And so all of these are inside the stairwell. Unfortunately, we can't use those stairs anymore, so we have to see them when we go down the elevator. But I wanted to show you a couple of our more unique commemorative stones. Does anybody want to take a guess as to what material Arizona gave? These are three pieces of what?
We have, a couple are suggesting copper.
Not a bad. Michigan actually gave a commemorative stone that had copper in it.
One said petrified wood with a question mark.
Yeah, that is a very good guess.
That's
Yes,
a bunch of
indeed.
woods.
This is petrified wood from the state of Arizona, and it was pretty heavy, and it took several people in order to be able to lift it, to set it into the wall of the Washington Monument.
Pretty high up, isn't it?
It's pretty high up. Yes. Yeah. So it was quite an endeavor to get the Arizona commemorative stone inside. Another kind of unique stone that we have is the one from the state of Alaska. And Alaska realized that they had never given a commemorative stone to the monument. And so this is one of the last ones that was ever installed. It came in 1982, and they put it in the monument on George Washington's birthday that year. It's from, again, Alaska. And while all of our commemorative stones are very important, if we sort of think in terms of monetary value or how much they're worth. This one is our most expensive because it's made out of a stone that we often make jewelry out of. It's green in color. Does anybody want to take a guess as to what kind of stone this might be?
Oh, we're getting some emeralds.
That's not a bad guess.
Based on your hint, yes, emeralds.
Based on the color green, yeah, that would be a very good guess there.
Ah, someone said jade.
Yeah, this is actually jade. So it's made out of jade from the Jade Mountains there. And if we sort of put a money value on it, we think it's worth about $1 million today. So maybe the Washington National Monument Society could have used this at the time that they were trying to raise money. Now, in addition to all of the states giving commemorative stones, we actually have stones from other countries. And this is a good example of one. It's kind of hard to see because it's a little bright, but if you look closely, you can make out that this is from the Alexandria Library in Egypt. And so we have stones from Germany and from Japan and from Wales and from another, I think Brazil gave a commemorative stone. And so commemorative stones came from other countries as well. And there was really one stipulation. The stipulation was the commemorative stone had to have something to do with George Washington in some way. So Ranger Jen could not have given a commemorative stone that just said Ranger Jen on it. In some way, it had to connect back to George Washington. And
That's
so,
the questions.
Oh, yep. Oh, go ahead.
This is actually great. When they take out an old stone to install a new one, how did they make sure the whole thing doesn't fall down?
Oh, that is a really, really good question. So a lot of the stones, and we have had stones that had to be replaced. One of the things that the society asked the states to do was try and make the stone out of material found within that state. And so that's why Arizona gave petrified wood and Alaska gave jade. Now, some of the states have sandstone, which is kind of a soft material. And if you remember when they stopped working, one of the things they didn't add to the Washington Monument was a roof. So any commemorative stone that had already been added in there, they were subject to rain and snow and sleet and all kinds of stuff. And some of the sandstone commemorative stones, they sort of eroded away, so you couldn't read them anymore. So they had to replace them. Fortunately, though, the thickness of the walls at the base of the Washington Monument are pretty thick. In fact, it's made out of multiple stones. It's not just one thick stone. And so being able to pull out some of the stones, it wouldn't affect the stability of the Washington Monument at all. And then as you make your way sort of up towards the top, the stones themselves are only about 18 inches thick. So very thin stones. And so those were kind of easier to sort of remove and to install the commemorative stones as well. And so they weren't really worried about sort of the strength of the monument by replacing or installing some of these commemorative stones, like the Alaska stone, which is also up towards the top. So the walls were thinner at that point. Any other questions?
Yep. Are all the gift stones in the original places, or have any been moved?
So one that I know of has been moved. In fact, it was a stone that was found in the bottom of the elevator shaft.
Oh, that's right.
During one of the restoration periods. And nobody really knew how that stone got there. They didn't know how long it had been there. And they really didn't know much about it, because a lot of these commemorative stones were coming in, and some of the records got lost along the way. So they weren't sure who gave this stone, how it got there, why it was in the bottom of the elevator shaft. And so they didn't know really what to do with it. So they took the stone all the way up to the top, and in the stairwell between the 500 foot where you look out the windows and the 490 where you see the exhibits, they put the stone kind of in that stairwell. And then they decided that may not be the best place for it. So they took that out, and then they put it with the rest that were in the much larger staircase. So yes, so they have at least one that I know of removed it and placed it somewhere else in the Washington Monument. And of course, there is a very famous story surrounding one of the stones that was given to the Washington Monument. We often refer to it as the Pope Stone because it was given by the Vatican. And a lot of times when these stones began to arrive, because remember, a lot of them are coming by ships and other ways, so it's taking quite a while to get to Washington, D.C. So some of them arrived during that work stoppage. Well, they weren't building the Washington Monument, so they kind of built a building off to the side, and they were storing some of these commemorative stones in that building, and the Pope Stone was one of them. Well, the story goes that one day somebody broke in and took the Pope Stone and supposedly tore it up or threw it in the Potomac River. We're not sure what happened to it. It's never been found. But a lot of people stopped giving not only commemorative stones after that, but also donations because they were afraid that maybe they would be taken too and maybe thrown in the river for whatever reason. And so that also played a role in why they stopped building the Washington Monument for so long. But eventually a replacement Pope Stone was sent to the Washington Monument, and it is inside the stairwell today. So we do have some replacement stones as well.
Okay, question about when did it open?
Oh, when did it open to the public?
I assume they mean the monument. Yep.
Yeah, so around 1886. 1886 to 1888 is when the majority, when people were starting to be allowed to go inside the Washington Monument. And again, at that point, you had the option of walking the steps, or you could take that 12-minute elevator ride up towards the top. And I think we do have records that suggest that a lot of people like to walk, because if you missed the elevator, you had to wait till it came back down, and it could be a half an hour to 45 minutes. So a lot of people like to take the stairs at that point. Yep, so the public was able to go in shortly after the monument was finished, and it's always had an elevator system in it. You know, from the time that it opened up until right now. So there's always an alternative way of getting up if you didn't want to walk steps.
Okay, I was about to say last one, but something else just popped in. So I believe my friends from Colorado are asking if there's Yule marble as part of the monument, which I think I know the answer to.
There's actually a commemorative stone from Colorado made of Yule marble. So yep, that was the type of stone that Colorado decided to send. And I think that's actually one, and I'll play our video again here. We'll kind of continue a little bit on a virtual tour, but I think that's one that you can actually see in the elevator as you make your way down. Now, you can't see these commemorative stones the entire way down. And so what happens is on the elevator doors, there is gas, and I'll show you that. And on two special occasions, that gas is sort of removed, and you have a view out the windows to see these stones. There's two reasons why you can't see them the entire way down. The first reason is the elevator would have to slow down, and it would take a long time in order to get people in and out. And so we'd have to reduce the amount of tickets that we could give out, and we wouldn't be able to allow as many people inside. The second is, if they kept it going at its normal speed, they were afraid that people might be affected by motion sickness. Plus, those commemorative stones would sort of fly by. And so on two occasions, we slow the elevator down, we clear the windows, and this is the view that you get to see. And here's some of the commemorative stones. That was the one from New York. We have one from Baltimore coming up right here. And Baltimore and New York decided not to send the right size commemorative stones. They wanted to make them big. And so these are two of our biggest ones. And then as you go down the elevator, as we make our way all the way back down, again, if you look at our elevator doors, you see how they're kind of cloudy here. This is that gas that's inside that we remove on those two occasions so that you can see the commemorative stones as you go down. And it's really hard to capture them on video because we do have the sort of the elevator shaft, and we have the gates that go around it. So you do see some of that. So we were only able to show you a little bit of what it looks like from the elevator view. But before you leave, when you exit the elevator doors, there is one more thing to see. It's kind of a little hidden gem that a lot of people don't even notice before they leave the Washington Monument. Now, today, we would certainly never encourage anyone to leave their mark on the Washington Monument. So graffiti is not a good thing, but during the Civil War, remember I told you that there were Union soldiers that were brought to defend the city, and they did a lot of drills on the grounds of the Washington Monument. And if anybody is local, you know that during the summer, it can get really hot and really humid here in Washington, D.C. And so some of these soldiers like to come inside the monument because it was a lot cooler because of the marble. And one of those soldiers that came in, his name was David Hickey. And while he was inside, he decided to try and draw George Washington. So you can see a little bit of a profile of George here on the wall. He left his name. He told us that he was from Mississippi originally, and that he was there in 1861. And so this is a little bit of a reminder of what happened in Washington, D.C. in the 1860s. Now, we did a little bit of research on David Hickey, and we did find that he unfortunately does not survive the Civil War. So he never comes back to Washington, where he was living at the time. But he is buried in Georgia, I believe, in a cemetery down there. And so again, this is something in Andersonville. Yep. So this is something a lot of people don't notice as they're making their way out of the Washington Monument. All right, so that concludes our virtual tour. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing now. And do we have any other questions? Anyone
sure do.
Like to
have a whole
ask?
bunch.
All right.
And I would just like to say that if anybody's looking and is curious about their commemorative stone, aren't they all on our webpage that you can look up?
Yep.
And be able to check out what your state contributed to the monument. So you should check that out on our webpage, or Google Washington Monument commemorative stones so you can see what yours looked like. We had a question about when the monument was finished. Was there some kind of big ceremony? There was a big dedication ceremony where lots of people came from all over the DC area. And there, it was a big deal. And there were some very important people, including the president, who attended that dedication ceremony. So yep, there was a big deal that was made out of the Washington Monument being finished. Student wants to know, how hard was it to install the elevator when the monument was being built? So yeah, so a lot of people do ask us, well, how was the Washington Monument actually built at the time? And originally what they did for the very first 152, 156 feet, there was some part of the Washington Monument that had been removed when they started building it again. There were a couple of courses that they weren't sure were strong, so they removed those. But one of the things that they had to do to build the original part of the monument is they used scaffolding. So they put scaffolding around it, and then inside they had a lift system, and then they could use that lift system to sort of place the stones. And then that same lift system would be turned into an elevator system once the Washington Monument was completed. So it wasn't as hard to build the monument as you might think. The one thing that had changed, though, is originally they had to hand carve every stone that was brought to the Washington Monument. But later on, they had machines that could carve the stones for them. And so that sped up the process. So if you kind of think about it, the first 152 feet took 6 years, but then the rest of the monument took 6 years. And that was, they built a lot more of it on the second phase. I hope that answered your question. Okay. Why was D. Hickey buried in Georgia? He was the Andersonville prison, and I think he died there. So that's my assumption on that. I don't know.
Yeah, so he, after
his
his
story.
time in Washington, he re-enlisted. And he was sent out as part of, I believe, a cavalry unit. And towards the end of the Civil War, there was this big campaign called the Battle of the Wilderness. And he was captured during that campaign, and he was sent down to this prison, which had way too many people living there. A lot of people got sick, and DC Hickey, he got sick and he died while being in that prison. And so they buried him there.
What are the occasions that you can see the commemorative stones?
Oh, so they could walk down the steps.
I don't know if that was the question or not, but that's how it was phrased.
Yep. So anyone who goes inside the Washington Monument gets to see them on the way down in the elevator. So that's something that's part of the standard tour. We haven't really had the stairwell open. I know that when Ranger Jen and I started here many, many years ago, we actually led walk down tours. So you could come with us and we would walk you down the steps and we would show you all of the commemorative stones that we have inside. But we stopped doing that because the stairwell needed a little bit of work. But also a lot of graffiti started to show up on some of our commemorative stones, and we wanted to preserve and protect those. So I don't know, I can't think of within the last 10 years at least any occasion where we've had the stairwell open where people can go up and down that. So yeah, so I think it would take a pretty big occasion, pretty big celebration, maybe the 200th anniversary of the Washington Monument. That might be the occasion that we would be looking for to open the stairwell back up.
We won't be there for that.
We won't be
I
there.
don't think.
No, I won't be there for the 200th anniversary.
We certainly won't be walking down the stairs.
Yeah.
A question of, do you happen to know why they captured DC Hickey? I would imagine in the course of war and battles, soldiers get captured.
Yeah, he was part of the Union Army, and he was captured by the Confederates as part of one of the battles. And yeah, that happened a lot during the Civil War, and people were sent to prison where they were held for a while. Some were released. Unfortunately, he doesn't survive long enough to be released.
So last call for questions. I think I was on it. I think I got them all. But if I missed anybody, please throw it in the chat. Yeah, someone's very taken with Hickey's story. Yeah.
It is sad. Yeah, it is. He's forever left his mark inside the Washington Monument, though. So, being able to tell his story, kind of at least keeps his name alive. So it's an interesting thing, and it's something that we always like to point out to visitors before they leave. Battle of the Wilderness.
Yeah.
That's the battle that he was captured in, the campaign that he was captured in.
It's also a great conversation about preservation and how our role in the Park Service is to take care of these places so that when you come to visit them, they're in good shape. Okay, I think I got them all. I think we're good. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you, Ranger Bethany, for all your time in preparing all of that. Thank you to the Trust for the National Mall for hosting us. As always, we are so happy to get out and have the chance to share our National Mall stories with all of you that join us. This was so fun. Thank you very much. You're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat. So thank you all so much for joining us. And yeah, we'll be back again, hopefully soon, to talk cherry blossoms and Thomas Jefferson soon. Yeah, we haven't done much with our Jefferson Memorial, so we have lots more stories to tell. We look forward to seeing you again. Thank you all very much.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.